Welcome back. I just finished preaching a whole sermon to nothing as the internet froze up on us. So I'm going to start back over. And it wasn't nothing. Peter was here, so he's going to get to hear it now for a third time. I'm going to start over, and as people continue to catch up with us, hopefully they'll pick up somewhere where we were in there. So Herod, as I said earlier, has no imagination. He is the king. He is the king within an empire where there's a Roman emperor who has expectations of him, part of which is no doubt to keep the peace in his local area. He has power, he has wealth, he has a position, and he hears from these wise men or from the hubbub around Jerusalem that there's a new king that has been born, and that is a threat to him, so he is afraid. At the same time, all of the people of Jerusalem are afraid. They too, like Herod, lack imagination. They live within the rules of an empire that says there is no rebellion, there is no new king that comes along, and their expectations are based on the rules of the empire. And their expectations are not wrong. In some 60 or 65 years, those particular people within that Jerusalem area are going to have an uprising against Rome, and it does not go well. The temple gets torn down, the city destroyed, and they become refugees who eventually become moving around the Mediterranean, the audience for the original writer of Revelation. And so their expectations aren't wrong, right? They know how the world works, they know how the empire works, and they live in that space. They just don't have an imagination that things can be any different. And then come these wise men who live in a different way. They're following a star to a place they do not know and not certain what's going to happen when they get there. They've just been told that there's this child they get to go meet that has been born King of the Jews. Not their king, someone else's king, but God has communicated to them, and they have followed this prompting to this new place. So in this story, there's the tension between those with no imagination, that anything can be different than the rules of the empire, and these wise men who live by a different path and a different way. I think of little kids who have a great deal of imagination. Perhaps you've had an opportunity to play a game with a little one who makes up the rules as you go along. They will ask this, that, and you'll say, well, wait a minute, I thought I could do this. And they'll say, no, the rule changed. This is the rules. And so you follow that rule, but then it changes again, and it can be hard to keep up with that little imagination as they have this little world and game that they are creating. Young people have imaginations like that, in part, I think, because their world is full of uncertainty and change. Their bodies are changing, their minds are changing, they're taking in all new things from the world and learning every day. And the pace at which things move, adults with long legs move faster than they do. We put them in cars and take them places beyond their ability to conceive of time and distance, so that they spend a significant part of their life not knowing what's coming or when it's going to get here. And in that space, they have an imagination and an experience that tells them that today is different than the way it's going to be later. But those same little ones will grow up into full-grown bodies and fully developed brains, and they will end up with bills and jobs or relationships and healthcare problems, all of which begin to condition them that the rules of the world are what they are, that the rules of the empire are what they are. I think of the times when, you're in a workplace and there's policies and procedures, or just the laws that we have as a country. All of those things are meant to bring order. And as we grow and develop and learn, we learn to live within that order and those routines, to the point that we convince ourselves that change is not something that's always happening, and that uncertainty is a bad thing, and that there's lots of life that we can control. The reality being really quite different than that. But we settle into these spaces where what is the way things are, and we don't think maybe that there's anything that's going to be different. We even develop cliches to remind ourselves of this. We say that the devil you know is better than the devil you don't, to remind us that change might be a little bit scary, and that uncertainty about where we're going might not be a direction we want to head. We say the grass is always greener on the other side, to cut off that possibility of imagination that something might be different than it is just now. More recently, I've heard people say that we bloom where we are planted. And all of these things have some element of truth, that we are where we are and we should live in the present moment. And I think Jesus encourages us to do that. But if we get to that space of just accepting the brokenness around us and those rules and routines that are not life-giving and saying that that's just the way it has to be, I'm not sure that's the healthiest place for us to land. In the story, that's where Herod and Jerusalem land. They say, listen, the devil you know, the Roman emperor, is better than the devil we don't. And the grass is always greener on the other side. But we have learned to live with right where we are, so let's just let that be. And it's into that these wise men come with a message and with an energy and an imagination that is entirely different. They don't even meet Jesus before they're overwhelmed with joy. They continue to follow the star, and it says the star stops, they're overwhelmed with joy, and then they get to go and meet Jesus. They function in a space of imagination that is outside of the rules of empire. Then God comes to them in a dream and tells them to go home a different way, right? They're just living in the space of moving and shifting. We as people live in a world that is full of all sorts of these rules that give us stability, but also can land in spaces of being draining and not life-giving at all, right? And it's easy to settle into those spaces, and yet Jesus comes into that world already breaking the rules and the expectations. The story of Christmas isn't Jesus coming into a palace as a prince and being raised up to be a king. It's him being born in a manger, in a stable, in a humble circumstance that is nothing what you would expect of a king. As Jesus goes through his life and ministry, he's always challenging the rules. Not just to challenge them, but to challenge the ones that are not life-giving, the ones that are leaving people out, the ones that are bearing down on people. And he tries to open up that law and that structure to be a space of love and grace and mercy and compassion and forgiveness. He's showing us that there is a different way than the rules of the empire and that you really can live that way. He goes through all of that in his ministry and shows us that you can indeed fight hate with love. You do not have to answer with violence with violence, but you can answer violence with peace and reconciliation. Death is not the final answer, but resurrection life is this new and wonderful gift that we are given. That is this imagination of faith that Jesus gifts us with to be able to live today, but to know that the rules and the structures today that are not life-giving are not the final answer, but that God is always doing something new. That tension between today and imagination, between the fear and the imagination, is always with us. For those of you that came of age during the Vietnam War, no doubt that some of you had those times where you imagined that it didn't have to be that way, and sometimes you clashed with your parents' generation about that because they were sitting in a different place of resistance to that change and uncertainty. In our day, we see young people taking the streets to protest and say that Black Lives Matter and that we can do better by people of color with respect to racism and oppression. There's an imagination there that comes into clash with the way that we know the world works and are convinced that it works. The same is true when we talk about the rights of LGBTQ people and the Me Too movement. All of these are spaces of imagination that say the ways that we have settled in don't have to be the way. We can bring love and grace and compassion and reconciliation and mercy into the world, and still within some of the structures we live, make them better so that people can be whole and well as we go along. Today we are a few days into 2021, and there has been much energy in setting back 2020 and saying goodbye to it. But we also know that here in early 2021, things are very much the same. We still don't have enough vaccine to get to everybody. We still have to wear masks and stay distant. We still have protocols and procedures we have to follow to try to help keep people safe. And yet in all of that, and all of the change and the uncertainty that goes along with it, these wise men remind us that God is there, doing something new, guiding us to new places, carrying us through all of this change and uncertainty till we land in a new and different place on the other side. And as we go. So may we be blessed to be like these wise men, people of imagination that understand there is structure around us that we can see beyond that to the gift of grace that God has given us, and to be vehicles of that grace to see blessing in the change and the uncertainty, and trust that God will indeed carry us to places of new creation as God promises to do, and God does again and again all along. Amen.